So enjoying this moment. Welcome. It's amazing to say that. It's been 4 years since you had the records conference in your camp. Great to see you all. Pandemic knocked us around just like it knocks everybody. And the Writers Conference is one of the things that we do here at Towson that we were in the creative writing community love best. And we love, we've created almost a kind of family here. There are so many people that we recognize and are glad to have back. I'm Michael Downs. I direct the graduate program in professional writing here at Towson. And ipso facto, I direct this conference with the help of a lot of people. We'll get to that. We organize the professional writing program. We organize the conference with the primary sponsors with some great help from Johns Hopkins graduate programs in writing and Karen Hubert, who I just saw somewhere. There's Karen Hubert right up there. It's amazing to see, first off, this is one of the largest groups of registrants we've had in several years, not counting even the fact that we didn't have any for 4 years. You know, so it's there's a lot of energy. We've got these great tablers in the literary fair. It's just wonderful to have all this energy here. It's great to see familiar faces. The Brunels right here in front, who've been coming every year since 2016. Harvey Friedenberg over here. Oh, wait, up there. Harvey Friedenberg up there. A great book reviewer from Harrisburg. If you have any questions about how to write a book review and get them published, he's written for Bookmark, Book Pages, Shelf Awareness, plus local publication stuff in Pennsylvania. Who else do we have here? Rosalia, who just had her debut novel come out right in the middle of the pandemic. Not at all an easy time to have a book come out. But the book was with Unnamed Press. It's called Stumbling Toward Grace. It's over on our book table, along with a lot of others. If you want to go over there and shop, great holiday gifts. I also want to mention Diana Friedman, who is way up in the back. And I want to mention her in particular. She's been here before, so also a familiar face, and affiliated with the Hopkins program. But she is one of the co-editors of an anthology. If you received a folder this morning, you might have seen a little flyer about it. It's an anthology of short fiction set in Maryland, and she's looking for people to send submissions. So if you've got any short fiction set in Maryland, it pays. The anthology actually pays. And she got a grant from the Maryland State Arts Council. Talk with Diana for more of that. And then there's just other people that we're glad to see. I mean, our faculty here, Ron Tanner from Good Contrivance Farm was somewhere. I think he might be out of the photo. He's up there. Our alumni coming back, Ashley Wagner, got her first chapbook of poetry out. It's just wonderful to see you all. I'm very happy about that. So whether you've been with us before or are here for the first time, that you are here shows you are committed to stories, verse, and to words. You are people who shape experience through language, which is no easy thing. Because it is hard to do that, and because it is sometimes too solitary, we come to events like this, and we talk about writing. We pick up a hint or three, a bright bit of inspiration, then we head home and sit at our lonely desks. And maybe the writing is a little easier for us having been together. I hope that will be your experience. You've all chosen an astonishing time to work as a writer. We're in a cultural moment when people who fear books feel empowered to try to ban them. We're in a moment when the Smithsonian canceled the Asian American Literary Festival this summer with only a month's notice. for reasons that remain mysterious, but might have had to do with content the Smithsonian deemed controversial. We're in a moment even when a nearby small college has announced it's shutting down, its literary review, which is one of the most prestigious literary reviews in the country, like top 10 on everybody's list. And Gettysburg College has decided they don't want to have it anymore. I'm heartened to say, though, that nearly a dozen students from Gettysburg College are with us today, and their presence shows that these undergraduates understand better than their college's administrators that literature is a thing to be valued, treasured, and protected. Please. It's also a really exciting moment for writing. The Hollywood writers won. And what that sort of thing is telling me, what all of this is telling me, is that in times of crisis, and if we have ever not been in a time of crisis in the last 5 years, it's sort of surprising. It feels like we're still in kind of crisis mode. Writing is powerful. Writing is power. And power sometimes threatens people, and they want to control it. And we don't want to have our right? So let's celebrate that today. Let's celebrate that we have voices, that they're our voices, that they will reveal the world, reveal your worlds, and be relevant for you. Most exciting of all. I don't want to take any more time than is necessary, so just a quick few items. Unfortunately, one of our speakers today, Carla Dupree, cannot be here. But fortunately, Jake, the friend who is going to share his time with her, has chatted with her, and is willing to do the whole thing himself. One of the things we love about this conference is that we invite presenters not just because they're accomplished, which they are, but because they are nice. So feel free during lunch, between breaks, to walk up and say hi to people. Right? They're nice people. They didn't know I was going to say this, but they are nice people, and they'll be happy to take some time to chat. If you have questions about anything, you can come to me, you can come to our grad assistants who have been doing a great job getting all this organized. Aaron Linner, who you might have known downstairs, Danny Bakagalupa right here, Daniela Bakagalupa, or our undergraduates who are volunteering, Hannah, Megan, and Juniper, who you also might have mentioned that downstairs, just let me know. And I think that's all I have, except to say, Daniela Bakagalupa would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Rainn.
Good morning. Okay, so when I first heard the title of Eric Weiner's most recent book, The Socrates Express, I worried whether I'd be able to. My mind conjures certain images when it hears words like philosophy, Socrates, dusty antiquated books, bearded men in robes debating semantics for hours on end, and philosophy major graduates who are stuck in landscaping jobs after college, like a dear friend of mine. But I'm really glad that I kept an open mind about Eric's book because I was so pleasantly surprised. This book's structure both comforts and engages. In each chapter, Eric rides a different train, Amtrak, the Swiss Federal Railways, the New York City subway, and delves into the life and legacy of a different philosopher. Have you ever not been able to put a book down about philosophy? Well, the Socrates Express was that first for me. Eric's alchemy is to take philosophy that might be difficult to read and to give it to everyone. Dare I say, these philosophers in Eric's book are relatable. Some even hated to get out of bed in the morning. And as I read, I walked alongside these people, these philosophers, through gardens and forests and cities, pondering their questions with them. For instance, part of paying attention, according to Simone Weil, is to be receptive to the world without seeking certain outcomes. In his chapter about Simone Weil, Eric connects her philosophy about paying attention to his experience of losing a notebook. Writing that loss is a short but menacing word, the Napoleon of nouns. He writes, we lose objects suddenly, but experience the loss gradually. It takes time to accept that your car keys or wallet or heart is not merely misplaced, but has crossed that invisible yet no less precipitous line that separates objects we possess from objects we once possessed. Non-existence terrifies us. It takes time to register. Part of what makes this work so well is that it holds both the macro, non-existence is terrifying, and the micro, misplacing car keys or a wallet. And when Eric writes, it takes time to accept that your car keys or wallet or heart is not merely misplaced. He writes with no commas, only the word or, a coordinating conjunction which denotes equal importance to car keys, wallet, and heart. I enjoy this rhetorical impact it has because it makes each item seem equally important, and they're obviously not. But really, some days, depending on the situation, I would rather have my wallet in hand than my heart intact. Over the next 3.5 pages, Eric rummages through the notebook and ruminates on Simone Weil's philosophy. He writes, at a loss, that word again, I return to Simone. Desperate times I tell myself, opening one of her books. She looks at my predicament and offers a simple diagnosis. I don't really want to find my notebook. I want to possess my notebook. I want to possess it. He goes on, my problem, says Bay, is that I view action to results. Life doesn't work that way. Neither does attention. So we learn that even when it feels we are being nibbled to death by ducks, we must hold on to the bigger picture. Loss comes in many shapes: medium, large, individual, and communal. And we want to control it and to understand it. But despite our fondest hopes and grief, we seldom have the power to return to us what or who is lost. Attention for attention's sake is what's needed. Attention without the need to possess. Sit with the loss and the feelings that they give rise to. They will pass. Having read Eric's book, I now count these philosophers as my best friends. I imagine our dinner party. I sit at the head of the table and I'm listening to each one discuss modern day issues, the effects of social media, US politics, and the ubiquitous but socially acceptable addiction to coffee. I try to imagine who will listen, who will be with the world suffering, who will argue, and who will walk away from the table, out the front door, and into the woods to disappear alone. The Socrates Express leads us to the trailhead of an old path that is needed now more than ever. It asks us to slow down, to not move so quickly from question to answer, from hypothesis to conclusion, from observation to judgment, to be fully embodied. Utilize your senses to see, listen, smell the coffee, and feel with your heart. This is also a lesson in writing too. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Eric Weiner.
Wow. That was the single best introduction I've ever heard. Most people just read the bio off my website. This was so much better. I feel like I should just sit down now. Philosophy majors, by the way, serve a useful purpose. They make English majors look practical. So, actually, it was Steve Martin. Steve Martin majored in philosophy as an undergrad. And he said in one of his routines, he said, any other subject, physics or geology, a bunch of facts, you forget it the day you graduate. But if you major in philosophy, you retain just enough to screw you up for the rest of your life. So there we go. Well, thank you for that gracious introduction. Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. I'd like to start with a confession. I'm kind of having flashbacks. And this happens seriously every time I come to Towson. Because you may not know this, but I grew up very close to here. We lived for a while, at least, on a little street called Piccadilly Street. It's very close to here. It was, and I assume it still is, a pleasant little street. It sounds idyllic, Piccadilly Street, but it wasn't, at least not for me. You see, at age 5, I threatened to run away from home. I made a great fuss about this. I made a proclamation that I was going to run away from home. Now, I realize a lot of 5-year-olds threaten to run away from home. But unlike those wimpy 5-year-olds, I actually did run away from home. And I got, true story, I got pretty far, about 2 miles from our house, and I was walking on the shoulder of North Charles Street, very close to GBMC Hospital. Now, looking back at this, it strikes me as more than a little crazy. But I was a determined kid, and I just knew that I would make it to wherever it was I was trying to make it to, had the Baltimore County Police not suddenly, and in my opinion, impetuously, put an end to my great adventure. Now, running away gets a bad rap. We assume the runaway is running away from something. Now, maybe they're running towards something. In my case, it was a bit of both. I was running away from an unhappy family life. That much is clear. My parents divorced a few months after my great adventure. But I was, or at least I'd like to think I was, also running towards something. Toward what? I'm not sure. But not knowing your destination makes you no less of a traveler. In fact, in my mind, it makes you more of a traveler. As Henry Miller said, one's destination is never a place, but a new way of looking at things. And that's my all-time favorite travel quote because it neatly sums up my approach to travel. Now, this is a writing conference, not a travel conference, so stay with me. Henry Miller was a great traveler, lived in Paris for a number of years, got around in many ways. And of course, only this group would get that. Oh, and of course, he was also a great writer. So was Robert Louis Stevenson, great traveler and great writer, made it all the way to the South Pacific, where he died on the island of Samoa. But Stevenson said, the great affair is to move. The great affair is to move. To which I say, amen. Now, the term travel writer is tossed around a lot these days. Well, it's not tossed around as much as it used to be, but it's still tossed around. It's a badge of honor for some, a bit of an embarrassment for others. I think it's meaningless. I don't think it really exists as a genre, even though you'll find my books often in the travel log section. Travel writing is what happens when a writer, hopefully a good writer, travels. I once told my editor, I'll call him Yoda, that I wanted to make my places characters. Don't, he said, make your characters characters. He was right, of course. Good writing is good writing. And as Yoda said, a reader will follow a good writer anywhere, even presumably on the shoulder of North Charles Street on a late summer afternoon. The great affair is to move. For me, and I imagine for many people in this room, the great affair is also to write. But why? Why write? Now, I realize on the face of it, it might seem like a silly question. Asking a room full of writers why they write is like asking a room full of gourmands why they eat. It should be self-evident. But our motivations aren't always so straightforward, and motivation matters. Why you do something determines how well you do it, and it determines how long you will continue to do it. And this motivation check is not something you just do once and you're done with it. It's continuous, checking and rechecking your motivation. Why am I doing this? Am I crazy? Why write? A number of years ago, the French newspaper Libération asked a number of well-known writers that very question. Why do you write? Not one respondent answered for the money. So let's be honest. Why would you engage in an activity that takes a long time, that is very difficult, that doesn't pay well, and where success is by no means guaranteed? Now, masochism is always a possible answer to that question like that. Let's put that aside. That may be possible. There's a little bit of masochist, I think, in all writers, but I don't think that's the primary motivation. I like Samuel Beckett's answer to why you write. He said it in French, but I'm not going to attempt that. He said, because I'm no good at anything else. Because I'm no good. And I think that's funny and also true. But let's dig a little bit deeper. Why write? It's actually a very modern question, and sadly becoming more modern every second. During Benjamin Franklin's time, and I've got Franklin on the brain because I just finished a book about Franklin called Ben and Me, out in June. And so he's on my mind. And during Franklin's time in the 18th century, if you wanted to learn something, anything, you had two choices. You could either read about it or you could hear about it. That was it. The printing press was radio, TV, the internet, all rolled into one. It was the medium of the time. This was not in dispute. We do not have a single medium of our time. We are splinted, fragmented, and splintering more each second. By the end of my talk, there'll probably be new outlets. So many choices that were not available to our parents, let alone to Benjamin Franklin. Podcasts, YouTube videos, email newsletters, Instagram, TikTok, and so on. Now, these are not neutral technologies. I really believe there is no such thing as a neutral technology. Every technology comes with a built-in bias. And I'm not talking about a political bias. I'm talking about an attentional bias. Television's bias is obviously toward the visuals, and I would argue towards superficiality. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a profound piece of television. That definitely exists, or a superficial book. Those exist too. But the bias is toward the visual and the superficial. Radio, where I worked for many years, now referred to as audio, I suppose, has a bias towards more intimacy and more depth. At NPR, where I worked for many years, we had a saying that you know why radio is better than television? Because the pictures are better. And so you're drawing the pictures with your mind. And print, books, printed word has its own bias too, which is more contemplative, which is harder on the reader, and which I think, and I'm biased, it is the best of these biases. So I don't know when this happened, but at some point, when you went, well, you used to just pump gas, okay? You used to just sit there and you would pump your gas and you would daydream, you would think some thoughts, some deep, some shallow. And at some point, videos appeared at gas station pumps. And now a video, usually an ad, is thrust upon you for the minute or two or three that it takes you to pump 89 octane into your car. So obviously at some point, some marketing whiz realized that they had a captive audience. They had people's attention for a few minutes. They're pumping gas. They can't really go anywhere. We're going to show them video ads. Now, I'm not sure what this says about our civilization, but I'm pretty sure it's nothing good. Why are there videos up there? Why are there not, for instance, poems? You could have, for small cars with small tanks, haikus. For larger cars, you could have sonnets, you know? And it seems funny, right? We're laughing, but I wrote a book about genius called The Geography of Genius, and I discovered a quote from Plato. Plato said, "What is honored in a country is cultivated there." What's honored in a country is cultivated there. People will ask me like, well, why don't we have great classical musicians like Mozart and Beethoven? Just the gene pool must have dried up. I'm like, no, we don't care about classical music, so we don't elevate those people to the level of genius. What do we care about? We care about technology. Who are our geniuses? Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, geniuses in quotes for both of those people. You can decide. What's honored in a country is cultivated there. So we could honor poetry, writing, and put it up there and have people read it while they're pumping their gas. But we don't. So why write? Why write in this day and age? It's a legitimate question today. It's a vital question. We write, I think, for the same reason we travel. The points. No, not the points. There are no rating points. It's not like you've finished 12 pages. You get a free stay or something at a Hilton. That's a good idea. As you finish pages, you should get like a free upgrade to business class or stay at a Hilton hotel. Get like a tie-up between the writing center and some hotel or airline chain. No, we write in order to look at things differently. One's destination is never a place, but a new way of looking at things. We write to see the world differently, and hopefully, so our readers will see the world differently as well. We write because we like to read. I do some teaching of writing workshops mainly, and I tell my students that there are two and only two things that a writer needs to do. And MFA is not one of them, I'll have to say. And number one is read, and number two is write. And the first one they're on board with, the second one, they're like, oh man. So there was this New Yorker cartoon a number of years ago that I love. And it's some guy in a tweed jacket at a cocktail party on the Upper East Side. Can everyone hear me? Yep. And he's chatting up some young, attractive woman, and he's got a drink in his hand, and he says, well, I don't like to call myself a writer because I haven't actually written anything, you know? And that's the thing about New Yorker cartoons. They're not really laugh out loud. They're more like, oh, yeah. So you've got to write. You've got to write. Twyla Tharp, the choreographer, said, doing is better than not doing. That's like words to live by. Like, just do it. Doing is better than not doing. There's a good saying among us writers, inspiration is for amateurs. You got to have, meditators say you have to have butt on cushion time to show up and meditate. It's button chair time or standing desk, I suppose. You've got to do that. The reading part is really important. If you don't read, if you don't appreciate good writing, then you can't be a writer. Now, I know a lot of my students get sort of freaked out by this when I present them with examples of good writing. It's like, oh my God, I could never write like Salman Rushdie. I'm like, no, you can't, but you shouldn't try. You should write like you. And also, and I think this is key, if you can appreciate the verbal gymnastics and the beauty of Salman Rushdie's poem or writing, or anyone's writing, you're halfway there. Your ability to appreciate good writing means that somewhere in you is a good writer. Why write? We write so we can think. Now, there's some confusion about this. Some people, writers and non-writers, think, oh, you think, you crystallize your thoughts, and then you express them on the page. This is not how it happens. It's not how it happens for me. I am thinking as I'm writing. And I don't know what I think until I begin to write. You cannot simply wait until everything crystallizes and it's all clear, and now you're going to put it down on the page. It's not only that you don't know how you're going to say something, you don't know exactly what you're going to say until you start saying it. So we don't really write because we have something to say. We write in order to figure out what we have to say. Why write? We write to convey, this is very obvious, something. Information, ideas, emotion. Now, for a long time, I was a journalist, briefly with the New York Times, for a long time with NPR. I'm now in full recovery, and writing shares a lot with common with journalism, but writing is not journalism. Journalism aims at objective truth, whatever the heck that is. This is a noble, important thing, but I think it's impossible, and I also think it's constricting. So when I made the transition from journalist to writer, I felt liberated. So a long time ago, I was in Afghanistan on assignment for NPR. I spent 2 weeks there. It was under Taliban rule, difficult conditions. And I would file my reports to NPR, and they aired on All Things Considered or one of those shows. And then I would get an email from friends saying, "Oh, I heard your stories. They were great. What's it really like in Kabul?" And that bothered me, that in my reports, you weren't learning what it's really like in Kabul. Now, as a writer, I was free to write about what it's really like in Kabul, what the journalists say to each other in the bar in the evening. Not all of it, but some of it. I could have an opinion. I like Kabul. I don't like Riyadh. I like Amy. I don't like Deborah. Now, is that opinionated? Yes. You need to back up your opinions. Your epiphanies must be earned. Your generalizations must stand on solid ground. But good writing is declarative. You can like things and not like things. I could also be funny. Being funny was liberating. I think humor serves two purposes in writing. One, and in life. One is to conceal the truth. You know, when someone gets a little too close to the bone in conversation with you, you might make a joke, right, to deflect it. But humor can also illuminate truth. And in my writing, which I hope you realize has humor in it, I try for the latter, the illuminating humor. I made one big change. I mean, I still did a lot of things journalists did. I traveled around the world, and I, talked to people. I wrote about it. But I made one big change. I stopped using the word interview. I never use it anymore. Now, I still talk to people, but I converse with them. I don't interview them. And there's a world of difference. And it's more than semantic. An interview is transaction. The interviewer wants something from the interviewee. In my case, it was a compelling tape cut for an NPR story. The interviewee usually wants something too, publicity for a cause, or spin on a political story, or simply the frisson of hearing their voice on the radio. There's always a quid pro quo, even if it remains unspoken. An interview is one-sided, with one party, usually the interviewer, lording it over the other. The interviewer asks the questions and the interviewee answers, or in the case of politicians, dodges the questions. An interview smacks of aggression. A CEO interviewing a prospective employee trying to trip them up, detectives interviewing a person of interest. An interview is just a half step shy of an interrogation, which is a half step away from an inquisition. And that doesn't sound like much fun. Conversation is different. A conversation involves a give and take, even if one party is giving more than the other. An interview proceeds in a linear fashion and for a set amount of time. The conversation is open-ended, often circuitous. You might begin by talking about blooming daffodils, but end up discussing the nature of good and evil. In an interview, such detours are considered transgressions and studiously avoided. In a conversation, they're called little blessings and are cultivating. So it just gets my mind in the right mindset to say, I'm going to talk to that person. I'm not going to interview them. And I've become friends, actual friends with people I write because I spend a lot of time with them. We write, why write? We write in order to question our assumptions. I want to talk briefly about a category called writing about strange shit. I've written about a lot of strange shit over the years. Strange food, for instance. I have tried harko in Iceland. Harko is rotten shark, and fried insects in Thailand. Now, normally, there are two options as a writer or even as a human being when approaching strange shit. One is, that's gross, or even barbaric, no. Rotten shark, fried insects, that's just weird. The other response is that's their way. They eat rotten shark, they eat fried insects. It's not good or bad. It's just the way it is. Cultural relativism, in other words. I think both are dishonest. And when I approach strange shit, can I say that word here? Because I just did like 5 times. Okay. I have a third option. And I think it's more honest. I will recognize that, wow, fried insects, that is really weird. That is weird, and I find it gross. But I then ask myself the question, but what do they get out of it? Might I see what they see in it? Might I enjoy fried insects? I did try them. The answer is no, but I tried them. So it's a way of being honest with yourself and with the reader. Not jumping to it's all okay, or not getting stuck on that's gross, that's not the way we do things. Why write? We write in order to fail. Stay with me. Geniuses in all fields fail more often than non-geniuses. Thomas Edison had more than 1,000 patents, mostly for completely worthless junk. Of Picasso's 20,000 works, only a handful were true masterpieces. Auden observed that in the course of his lifetime, or her lifetime, I'll add, or their lifetime, the major poet will write more bad poems than the minor. The successful poet will write more bad poems than the unsuccessful poet. You've got to be willing to write complete and utter crap. That the road to good writing leads directly through bad writing. There's no avoiding that. And that's a kind of failure. The word essay comes, as you probably know, from the French essai, coined essentially by Montaigne in the 16th century. And an essay is an attempt, a try, a trial. You're going to try something. So I write about Montaigne in the Socrates Express, and he did his writing up in a tower to the side of his chateau in southern France, close to Bordeaux. And of course, I had to go there and drink wine and to research him. And he's alone in his tower, and he separates himself from the world out there and away from himself too. He had to take a step back in order to see himself more clearly, the way you take a step back from a mirror. We're often too close to ourselves to see ourselves. This is why writing workshops and retreats exist, by the way. Montaigne said, we are all huddled and concentrated in ourselves, and our vision is reduced to the length of our nose. So move your nose. Stick it here, stick it there. Exterior distance makes interior closeness possible. So it's up in this tower where Montaigne ended his conversation with the world and began one with himself. It is time, he said, to turn my back on company and retire into my shell like a tortoise. I think all writers have this kind of push and pull of wanting to be in the world and wanting to get the hell away from people. I know I'm that way. I'm actually an introvert who does a very good imitation of an extrovert. I think most writers are like that. You're in the world, you're not in the world. Now, up in his tower, where he's doing his writing, he's got 1,000 books, awesome library, and he's got these quotations carved into the rafters in Latin and in French. And one of them that caught my eye says in English, well, he wrote it in French, but the translation is, what do I know? What do I know? And that's what motivated him. Now, there's a lot of bad writing advice out there, and I've been on the receiving end of a lot of it. And one of them is write about what you know. And I think that's just wrong. You write about what you want to know, not about what you know. Why write? We write to learn. I mean, I knew very little about those philosophers, except for Gandhi, the 14 philosophers before I wrote the book. Now I know a lot, and I take the reader along on that learning process. We also write to get out of our silos. We writers are part of a dying breed in this country and in the world, the generalist. Writers are not experts. We know a lot about a subject, but we are not experts. Expertise is the death knell of good writing. I've written 4 books, now 5, on happiness, spirituality, creative genius, philosophical wisdom, and Benjamin Franklin. As I said, when I started each project, I knew very little. By the time I finished, I knew a lot, but I did not become an expert. I don't like that word. Writers are not experts in many ways. The expert is the opposite of good writer. The expert knows more and more about less and less. The writer knows more and more about more and more. The expert has reached the pinnacle of their knowledge. The writer is just beginning to climb. The expert is a know-it-all. The writer is a see-it-all. Good writers make connections that are unexpected but true. Unexpected but true. They link seemingly disparate ideas, ones that would never occur, to the expert. The unassailable knowledge of the expert is a dead thing. The emergent knowledge that writers capture is fluid and alive. And on the page, I try to share my acquired knowledge. Why write? How am I doing on time? Am I good? Okay, 10 more minutes, and then think of questions too, because we really should turn this into a conversation and not a monologue. Like those gas stations that just, if you could talk back to the pump, like that would be better. Maybe they could be like microtherapy sessions, like, these online therapy things. It'd be like, while you're pumping gas, be like, there's a therapist that pops up for like 3 minutes. Yeah, that's okay. What will we call that? We need a clever title. I'll have to come back to that.
Pump and circumstance.
Pump and circumstance. That is brilliant. Copyright that. All right. Why write? We write to remain young, I think. A good writer, like a good philosopher, is a 7-year-old with a bigger brain. And we need to hold on to that. That freshness of language that gets beaten out of us in schools, I'm sorry, and in the corporate world. The kind of freshness of language that when a 5-year-old seeing a naked woman for the first time describes her as barefoot all over, that's fresh. And when I worked for NPR, my favorite people to interview were not people who were fluent in English, but people who were almost fluent in English. Not only did they have wonderful accents, but because it was not their native tongue and they were still working at it, they were more inventive with language. The refugee who says, I don't know how to say it, but it's like my heart was how you say confetti, or something like that. They're actually still playing with the language. And that playfulness is important in all creative endeavors, especially writing. When Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, was asked what he did, he said, I play with microbes. Another famous scientist, Richard Feynman, the physicist, wrote that he enjoyed his work most when he was simply playing. He says, I used to do whatever I felt like doing. It didn't have to do with whether it was important for the development of nuclear physics, but whether it was interesting and amusing for me to play with. And that playfulness lies at the heart of good writing. That's why when I am stuck, which happens often on a chapter, say, I will create another Word file and call it, let's say, chapter 12 sandbox or chapter 10 sandbox, a new Word file. And in bold letters, I write, it says sandbox, and I know that it is a place to play and to have fun. Supposedly, the novelist Donna Tartt writes at the top of each page, "This doesn't count." And that can be very, very liberating. And you need to have that playful quality. I mean, there's writer's block, right? Okay, we've all had that. But do 7-year-olds have play block? Like, oh, man, I'm at the playground, just I'm not feeling it. It's just the play's not happening. I don't know. No, kids don't have that. Why write? We write to diminish pain. Pain articulated is pain diminished. I firmly believe that. And I've seen that in writing workshops, and I've seen that myself. When I write about my struggle with depression or with anxiety, I feel better. I've given voice to something that's been until then inchoate, free floating, and when you name it, you defang it. When you write about it, you defang it. Writing diminishes pain. Conversely, we write to amplify joy, to celebrate life. There's gratitude journaling is very popular in some circles. You know, write down what you're grateful for today or what you're grateful for this week. I think all writing is a form of gratitude journaling. Even writers who are kind of cynical, there's got to be some light in the darkness. Carl Jung called neuroses inauthentic suffering. Good writing is authentic suffering, right? You're putting it on the page for real. You're not hiding from it anymore. When I was struggling with my first book, The Geography of Bliss, I was having a hard time. I'd never written a book. I didn't know if I could do it. And I called my friend Bobby, who's a newspaper editor, and I said, Bobby, this is really hard. I really want this to be a good book. I'm trying to write a good book. And she's like, stop. Like, don't think about writing a good book. Write an honest book. And I found that very liberating. Trying to write well, just you freeze up. You put pressure on yourself. Trying to write honestly, that's something we're all capable of. A few more, and then we'll go to questions. Why write? We write to surprise ourselves. No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, said Robert Frost. If you know exactly what you're going to say before you say it, you're not a writer. You're a transcriber or a typist. You need to be surprised by your own work. I'm not a novelist, but I know novelists who say that their characters surprise them. At first, I thought this was hallucinatory, borderline psychotic. I realized it's not. But you need to be willing to make abrupt changes of direction. When I was a journalist, I couldn't really afford to do that because there were deadlines and I had to get the story in. Each chapter in the Socrates Express is a how-to question. How to get out of bed like Marcus Aurelius, how to wonder like Socrates. I went to Concord, Massachusetts to write about Henry David Thoreau, sure that it was going to be how to live simply like Henry David Thoreau or how to be alone like Henry David Thoreau. Then I learned a couple things. I learned that he was 20 minutes away from his mom's home cooking, and he would go into town 3 times a week to drop off his laundry and pick up some pie. It was still a great experiment. And then I'm talking to a librarian in Concord, and she's like, seeing. He was all about vision and seeing. And he would go to Walden Pond and look at it from different angles. He would even put his head between his legs and look at it upside down. And I switched gears and changed the chapter to how to see like Thoreau, because I was open to the possibility of surprise. We write in order to stop thriving. Not thriving. Bad Freudian slip. In order to stop striving. Why did I say that? I need to go to Pump and Circumstance and have a microtherapy session. Good writing comes from a different part of you that wants to be a good student, even, or a good business person. It's a different kind of striving. We don't write for the reader. We write for ourselves. I really believe that. You can't give the reader what they want because they don't know what they want. Now, maybe this sounds selfish, but as a sentient being, other sentient beings, what you write about is going to resonate with them. But ultimately, I think all writers do write for themselves. We write to remember. Memories are fragile, fleeting things, and we need to record them. And photos are poor substitutes for written notes. And I always tell my students to write it down. A single word, the right word, is worth 1,000 pictures. We write to pay attention, as Simone Weil taught me. Whenever I'm researching a book, especially when I'm traveling, I'm hyper observant. I know I have a limited amount of time and money in a certain place, so I'm going to hoover up everything. I'm going to caress the divine details, as Nabokov said. And I do this in a way I don't when I'm sitting on my couch at home. Now, there's nothing, I think, about the energy of New Delhi that's different from Silver Spring, Maryland, but I'm attuned to this. And you can do it at home. You can pretend to be a tourist in your own home. It's just easier when you're on the road, I think, and when you have a focus for your attention. Writing demands attention, but not just any kind. Real attention needs empathy, said the great poet Mary Oliver. Attention without feeling is just a report. Now, reports are fine for journalism, but not for writing. And we write to tell the truth, but not objective truth. We write to convey subjective truth. And I realize that people, when I say that, are like, we have too much subjective truth. Everyone's an armchair expert and they're mouthing off. I think what we have is two things going on. We have, yes, too much of that subjective truth, but people are out of touch with their own lived experience. That word term's used a lot, but I'm surprised at how many people don't know what they think or how they feel. We are inundated with others telling us how we should think and how we should feel, and we've lost touch with that. And I think writing can help us reconnect with that. The term subjective data is not an oxymoron. There is such a thing. When psychologists studying happiness wanted to say measure the happiness of anyone in this room, they can do it and do it accurately, and there are no electrodes involved. What they do, and I'm not making this up, is they ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you these days? And then people are like, but that's subjective. It is. In fact, these psychologists call happiness SWB. You need an acronym, subjective well-being. But if you don't know who you're happy, that you're happy or not, who does? If you went to a doctor and said you were in pain, the doctor, a good doctor, wouldn't dismiss your pain merely because the MRI showed nothing. The most important truths in our life are subjective truths. I know that I love my daughter, Sonia, and no amount of evidence will convince me otherwise. And I don't spend a lot of time trying to prove it or trying to think about it. And I think these are the kind of subjective truths that all writing, fiction and nonfiction, strives for. And finally, to wrap up, get back to the masochism part. So I came across this peculiar quote from Thomas Mann. He said, the definition of a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. And that's strange. Non-writers don't get that at all. But I read it and I got it. Writing is probably one of the few activities in the world where the more you do it, the harder it gets. And I'm not sure why this is. I think it's because you're trying to maintain that freshness I spoke of, and you're trying to go deeper. So writing is hard, and we write anyway, and we write despite the fact that it is hard. And I honestly think we write because it is hard. We watch videos at Pump and Circumstance because it's easy and because we have no choice, we're trapped. And we go to the movies because it's easy, but we read books because it's a little more difficult, but we get so much out of it. And we write because it's hard also. And coming back to Samuel Beckett, at least for me, I write because really, really, I'm not good at anything else. So thank you for listening.
So it's a little bit past 10. We're usually at this point breaking, but you don't need to break yet because we just got started. So let's just take a couple of questions, maybe two, and then we'll break. We all can get coffee and move on to other sessions. For now.
Okay. First of all, thank you. I don't know why I said that, except that
I'm glad you
that's
did.
the most important question that we can ask about anything.
Right.
I was relieved when you mentioned the word Sonia, because the question that was coming up for me all the time was, did you ever get married and have kids? And how did that play into your writing journey, and how did it work out for the kid?
The question is, how did marriage and at least a kid play into your writing journey?
Yes, a kid, a great kid. She is my foil. She has been. So I took her along on the Socrates Express. We went to France together, and she was 12 or 13 at the time. And I'm having these highfalutin philosophical ideas where we're crossing the Simone de Beauvoir Bridge, a pedestrian bridge in Paris, and you enter on one level, but you can exit on a different level entirely. And I'm explaining to Sonia about how this is a metaphor for her existentialist philosophy, how we make choices, but we can always reimagine them. And she's like, Dad, have you ever heard of a hysterical pregnancy? I'm like, what? What's that? She's like, that's when you think you're pregnant, but you're not. You've just convinced yourself. I'm like, yeah. She's like, it's just a bridge. It's just a cool bridge, Dad. So I put that in the book. And I don't think she realized, now she's 18 and I can't do that anymore, but for legal reasons, really. She has an agent and a lawyer, and I got to go through them. But yeah, and she's only now realizing that she's appeared in a book or two. And so she was a foil and a companion, and it's worked out well. And she's seriously threatening to major in philosophy now. So other questions? Maybe we can take two more if they have them. Yes.
Mention sort of brighter programs. Curious if you can expand on.
I mentioned a what? A gripe. Gripe's too strong. I got to be very careful here.
When you say Hopkins, and we are not MFA programs.
Okay.
So relax.
No, I think, I think writing is a lot like cooking and sex, that you learn to do it by doing it. And to the extent that MFA programs give you an opportunity to do it, I think they are helpful. But I was struck by how much writing advice is actually didn't work for me. Like write about what you know, and I have to sort of come up with my own rules. I have nothing against MFA programs. And I was telling Jeff that if I could live my life over again, I might have gone, the academic route instead of the journalism route. And I could easily be teaching in an MFA program. So I didn't mean it as a gripe so much as be alert to this sort of anything that puts writing into a box, I think is bad. And if MFA programs say this is the way you should write, that's not good. And I imagine the good ones do not do that. So, thank you. Another question?
More question?
Come on. Come on. There we go.
Philosopher? Favorite philosopher?
It's like my favorite child. Well, I got one. That's easy. I'm going to say it's a toss-up between Gandhi, because I love India and I love his practical idealism, and Montaigne, who I mentioned, because he was really a writer. I put him in there, and he's considered a philosopher by many, but really he's going up there and he's got all his books and he's up in the tower and he's had some success. He was mayor of Bordeaux. And he's like, what do I know? And then he's writing about everything. He wrote about cannibals. He wrote about thumbs. He wrote about death. He wrote about flatulence. Anyone who can cover that sort of range in a human way, always self-doubting, is okay by me. So I would say those two. Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. So 10:15, we'll have sessions opening in other rooms. We'll also have a session here featuring Eric and Elizabeth Evans Dickinson and Jean Manasco. So go refuel with coffee. But first, one more round of applause, please, for